The city was alive in its usual rhythm. Sirens in the distance, engines humming, neon reflections shimmering across wet asphalt. It was Friday night in Atlanta, the kind of night when the streets breathed with restless energy and quiet fear. Dr. Naomi Ellis drove through it with calm precision. Her eyes, tired but sharp, scanned the rearview mirror as streetlights streaked past like silent warnings. A respected trauma surgeon, she'd just finished a 14-hour shift at Grady Memorial Hospital. Her scrubs were neatly folded in the passenger seat, her ID badge still clipped to her coat. To most, she looked like any other professional heading home from work. But to the patrol car tailing her for the last 6 blocks, she looked like a statistic. The flashing lights ignited behind her, blue and red reflections slicing through the dark. Naomi's pulse quickened. She pulled over slowly, hands steady on the steering wheel. A habit born from too many stories she wished she'd never memorized. The patrol car stopped behind her. 2 silhouettes stepped down. The taller one moved like he had something to prove. The shorter one hesitated, a flicker of humanity quickly buried under training and pressure. The air outside was cold, sharp enough to sting the skin. Naomi cracked her window just enough to hear the muffled command. The voice was clipped, aggressive. The tone didn't ask questions. It issued orders. Her heartbeat synced with the distant wail of another siren somewhere else, a reminder that real emergencies existed while she was living. Through this false one, she explained where she was coming from, gestured toward her hospital badge, mentioned she was a doctor on her way home. But the voice outside didn't soften. It grew louder, demanding, accusatory. Naomi could sense the shift, the electric tension before things went wrong. She'd seen it too many times in too many trauma bays as victims came in bruised, broken, or worse, and she knew exactly what came next. The taller officer's flashlight slashed across her face down to the floorboard, back up again. He said something to his partner, his tone smug, as if confirming a suspicion that had already become fact in his mind. She kept her voice measured, movements minimal. But when she reached for her ID, slowly, deliberately, he misread it. Or maybe he didn't care. The sound came first, a dull pop, deafening in the confined space of her car. The bullet shattered her side mirror, tearing through glass and air, grazing her shoulder as it buried itself in the headrest. Naomi froze. For an endless heartbeat, the world turned silent except for the rush of her own blood in her ears. Then chaos. Commands shouted, doors yanked open, hands dragging her into the cold street. Her medical coat fell into the gutter, the embroidered Dr. N. Ellis catching the red-blue glare before sinking into the grime. She was on the ground now, knees pressing into wet asphalt, her shoulder bleeding through the sleeve of her blouse. Her hospital ID swung loosely from its clip, glinting under the patrol lights. The younger officer saw it, hesitated, his eyes widened. The taller one barked orders, his tone frantic now, trying to control a narrative that had already spiraled. Bystanders appeared, phones raised, recording the unfolding tragedy. In less than a minute, Naomi Ellis became a headline waiting to be written, not for her years of saving lives, not for her brilliance or compassion, but for surviving something she never should have had to face. When backup arrived, the narrative had already begun to mutate. Possible suspect, they said. Uncooperative. Reached for something. None of them mentioned the hospital ID still dangling from her coat. None of them mentioned the gun still in its holster. As Naomi sat in the back of the ambulance, her shoulder wrapped in gauze, her gaze stayed locked on the reflection of the patrol lights in the wet pavement. The reflection pulsed like a heartbeat, steady, cold, unfeeling, and beneath it all, a realization began to burn through the fog of shock. Her life had been nearly taken by the same system she'd once trusted to protect her patients on their way to her hospital. The city outside moved on, unaware that a storm had just been born, one that would soon expose everything the badge tried to hide. Morning sunlight crept through half-closed blinds, painting sterile patterns across white hospital sheets. Dr. Naomi Ellis lay still, her shoulder bandaged, her body sore from bruises that told a story her medical chart did not. Machines hummed softly beside her, their rhythm indifferent to the turmoil in her chest. The hospital room was familiar yet foreign. She had saved lives in these very halls, not once imagining she would return as a patient. Now every sound, the squeak of nurses' shoes, the rattle of trays, the murmurs beyond the curtain, felt heavier, loaded with unspoken truth. Her phone lay silent on the bedside table. Overnight, the story had already spread. Snippets of shaky cell phone footage, conflicting police statements, polarized headlines, routine traffic stop turns violent. Officer opens fire during altercation. Doctor claims racial bias. Each headline twisted the truth a little more, polishing the edges of violence until it looked almost procedural. Naomi stared at her reflection in the dark screen. The woman looking back was unrecognizable, haunted, defiant, silent. Her mind replayed every second of that night. The flash of light, the sound of breaking glass, the cold pavement. The echo of that gunshot still lived in her bones. Hospital staff avoided her eyes. Some offered polite smiles that didn't reach their faces. Others whispered after she passed, not out of cruelty but fear. Fear of being associated with the wrong narrative. By afternoon, hospital administrators visited. 3 men in suits and an HR representative. Kind faces masking careful words. They spoke of policy, public image, and pending investigation. They assured her she'd be placed on leave for her own safety. Her badge, her lifeline to the work that gave her purpose, was quietly collected and placed into an envelope. Naomi didn't protest. She simply nodded, numb. She'd been through enough trauma wards to recognize when someone was preparing her obituary in polite language. That night, she sat by her apartment window overlooking the city. Atlanta glowed beneath her, restless, neon-lit breathing. Every flash of a siren on the street below sent her heart racing, but she didn't flinch anymore. She just watched. Somewhere across that same city, a man was also awake, Detective Marcus Hale. Marcus had been a police officer for 15 years, decorated, controlled, the kind of man who'd built his career on loyalty and procedure. He wasn't the one who fired the shot, but he was the one reviewing the footage now, sitting alone in the precinct evidence room, illuminated by the flicker of a monitor. The internal investigation was already underway, but Marcus had seen enough to know how it would end. He'd watched the grainy body cam footage frame by frame. He saw Naomi's hands steady on the wheel. He saw the officer's flashlight beam and the reflexive flinch before the shot. And he saw the face of his colleague, Officer Trent Mallory, frozen in panic before the bravado returned. Marcus knew the department's rhythm. First, containment, then justification, finally silence. He leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Outside his office window, rain streaked across the glass, blurring the city lights. He thought of the slogans painted on their cruisers, "Protect and serve." The words now felt hollow, a promise recited, not honored. He opened the department's report file. Already the narrative was forming. Erratic behavior. Refusal to comply. Sudden movement toward the glove compartment. All the familiar phrases, the language of absolution. He clicked open another tab. A name, Dr. Naomi Ellis. He skimmed her credentials. Awards, volunteer work, trauma surgeon history. The dissonance hit him hard. How could someone who saved lives be turned into a threat in less than 30 seconds? Marcus exhaled slowly. For the first time in years, the uniform on his back felt heavier than armor. It felt like guilt. Naomi, meanwhile, had begun to write. Not for catharsis, but for evidence. Her laptop glowed against the dark room as she typed every detail of that night. Every sound, every command, every second between life and death. She wrote until her fingers cramped, the words spilling from pain into purpose. By midnight, she stopped. Her eyes burned, her body ached, but her resolve solidified. She wasn't going to let this be another name lost in the static of hashtags and hashtags forgotten. She would document, expose, and force the truth into daylight, even if no one wanted to see it. And somewhere across town, Marcus closed his laptop. His finger hovered over the report submitted button but didn't press it. Because he'd written the truth, and the truth didn't match the version the department demanded. He stared at the flickering cursor and realized the same thing Naomi had. Silence protects the powerful, but it poisons the soul. Outside, the rain eased. 2 people, strangers yet destined to meet, stared out at the same city, both fighting the same invisible enemy from opposite sides of the line, both unaware that their paths were about to collide in ways that would change everything. The night deepened. The storm had only just begun. The city didn't pause to remember. Headlines burned bright for a day. then dimmed beneath newer tragedies. But for Naomi Ellis, the world hadn't moved on. It had only sharpened into painful clarity. 2 weeks after the shooting, she stood in front of a government building, the Civil Review Board, a modern glass structure built to reflect transparency but designed to obscure. Her sling was gone, her wound healed enough for her to move freely, but inside her something still bled quietly. She handed over her formal complaint, a folder thick with evidence and medical records, time-stamped photos, and screenshots of distorted headlines. A clerk accepted it with the careful detachment of someone used to futility. Naomi thanked her politely, then walked away, the sound of her heels echoing through the marble lobby, confident, steady, defiant. That night, she received her first email from an unlisted address. No greeting, no signature, just 6 words. I saw the footage. It's wrong. Attached was a partial file, a blurred freeze frame from a body cam. It wasn't from her public video. It was internal, confidential, and the timestamp showed something no public report had mentioned. The officers had activated their cameras after the shot. Her hands trembled slightly as she stared at the screen. Whoever sent this had access to evidence the department was burying. The email address was encrypted, but Naomi had worked in trauma enough to recognize lifelines when she saw them. Someone inside was trying to help. That someone was Detective Marcus Hale. He sat in his unmarked car 3 blocks away from the precinct. Engine off, laptop open, the glow of the screen painting tired lines across his face. His department had moved quickly, too quickly. The internal review was closed in record time, clearing Officer Trent Mallory of wrongdoing. Use of force justified. No misconduct found. The report read like a confession disguised as a press release. Marcus knew what that meant. Someone powerful wanted this buried. He'd seen the pattern before: falsified timestamps, doctored footage, witness statements edited for clarity, but never had it hit this close to his conscience. He'd watched Naomi's video online, the viral clip recorded by bystanders. He'd seen the blood, the composure, the quiet strength. Most people broke under injustice. She hadn't. He admired that. Envied it even. And now, sitting in the dim light of his car, he'd made a decision that would cost him everything. He'd leaked the files anonymously. He'd chosen his side. In the following days, Naomi noticed small changes. Her story, once buried beneath sensational headlines, began to resurface on independent blogs and community forums. Articles quoted internal leaks. Whispers of corruption began circulating, connecting her case to others in a pattern of excessive force, manipulated evidence, silenced victims. And as the noise grew louder, the pressure tightened inside the precinct. Marcus felt it first. Superiors demanded loyalty pledges disguised as check-ins. His partner, Officer Ramirez, stopped speaking to him altogether. Anonymous texts began arriving on his phone, warnings that didn't sound like idle threats. Still, he pressed on, retrieving files quietly at night. Each document he leaked chipped another fracture into his conscience and another crack into the department's facade. Naomi, on her end, began to gather voices. She met with local advocates, attorneys, even journalists who'd once dismissed her as another controversial headline. She never mentioned the source of her leaks, only that she had reason to believe more victims existed. Every conversation added another layer to her resolve. What started as a personal fight was evolving into something far larger. One night, as rain lashed against her apartment windows, she received another encrypted email. No text this time, just a video file. She hesitated before pressing play. The footage opened in darkness, the camera tilted toward asphalt. Then voices. The same 2 officers. Cameras rolling? Not yet. A pause. Good. Let's make sure she complies this time. Naomi's stomach clenched. The camera flicked on seconds after the gunshot, confirming everything she'd claimed. Her breath caught in her throat. The proof was undeniable, and whoever sent it risked everything to get it to her. The next morning, Marcus watched the video go live. He hadn't posted it, someone else had. Maybe Naomi herself. It was everywhere now. News outlets, social media, national television. The footage played on loop. The damning seconds the department had sworn didn't exist. By noon, his badge was suspended pending inquiry. By nightfall, protesters filled the streets outside the precinct. Signs, chants, cameras. A city awake again. Naomi stood at the edge of the crowd, hood up, watching. Her face appeared on posters now. Justice for Dr. Ellis. The sight both humbled and terrified her. She hadn't wanted fame. She'd wanted accountability. Inside the precinct, Marcus sat alone at his desk, staring at his badge lying flat on the table. A symbol he once wore with pride now felt like a relic of something broken. Through the blinds, he could see flashes of protest lights outside, hear the faint rhythm of chants growing stronger. He exhaled slowly. For the first time, he felt strangely free. He knew what would come: interrogation, disgrace, perhaps even arrest. But he also knew this: the truth was no longer buried, and as Naomi stood among the crowd, hearing her name shouted like a battle cry, she realized something profound. The system that tried to silence her had instead amplified her voice. Two people, one doctor, one detective, had crossed the invisible line between silence and defiance. Together, unknowingly, they had ignited a reckoning that could no longer be contained. The storm that began on a dark roadside now thundered over an entire city. Rain returned to Atlanta as if the sky itself mourned the truth being dragged into the light. For weeks, the city pulsed with unrest, protests by day, tension by night. Headlines screamed, "Body Cam Scandal Rocks Department." Each news cycle unearthed new evidence, new lies, new pain, and at the center of it all stood Naomi Ellis, now reluctantly public, her face a symbol she never asked to become. She spent her days in meetings with lawyers and journalists, her nights compiling evidence in dim light, her apartment transformed into a war room of justice. Her coffee table overflowed with flash drives, affidavits, medical reports, printed emails, and screenshots. On one wall, a timeline connected everything with thin red threads, a surgeon's precision turned into an investigator's obsession. Yet something was missing, the final link that would make the case undeniable. It arrived one evening, slipped beneath her apartment door in a plain brown envelope. No name, no note, only a single USB drive inside. Naomi hesitated before inserting it into her laptop. The screen flickered, then loaded a folder titled simply, "Internal Memo, Confidential." Inside were scanned documents marked with department letterheads, timestamps, and digital signatures. They outlined a coordinated directive. Body cameras were to remain optional during uncertain compliance events to protect operational flexibility. In plain language, it meant permission to turn the cameras off when accountability was inconvenient. Naomi's breath caught. This wasn't just negligence. It was policy. The metadata showed who authored the directive: Captain Marcus Hale. She froze. The name echoed. The same detective who had been leaking evidence. The unseen ally she'd trusted through encrypted emails. Could it be the same man? Her heartbeat quickened as the contradiction twisted inside her. Had he betrayed her trust? Or was the truth more complicated? She traced the dates. The memo was from 3 years ago, before the city's reforms, before the shooting, before he had ever reached out. Still, it meant one thing. He had once been part of the system that created this corruption. And now he was helping her dismantle it. Across town, Marcus sat in his small apartment staring at his phone. His badge had been officially revoked. His pension frozen. Friends he'd known for decades no longer returned his calls. The department had turned him into a ghost overnight, but he'd made peace with it. Because for the first time he was clean. His laptop chimed, a new message. An address, a time. No signature, but he knew who it was. 2 hours later, they met for the first time in person. A quiet diner on the city's outskirts, its neon sign buzzing faintly through the rain. Naomi arrived first, wearing a hooded coat, cautious but steady. Marcus entered a few minutes later, shoulders heavy, eyes alert but tired. They didn't need to speak. The silence between them carried everything. Shared guilt, shared loss, shared purpose. They sat opposite each other, a small table between them. Naomi slid the flash drive across the surface. Marcus stared at it, recognition flashing in his eyes. He nodded slowly. The world outside the window blurred with rain and headlights as two people, once strangers, now conspirators of conscience, aligned their purpose. For the next hour, they worked quietly. Marcus provided context, names, departments, cover-up chains. Naomi added documentation, mapping the connections between policy, misconduct, and the city officials who profited from silence. What emerged on the screen before them wasn't a story. It was a machine, engineered to oppress, fueled by policy and protected by bureaucracy. They knew what it meant. They weren't just up against a few corrupt officers. They were fighting an entire system designed to self-heal by erasing truth. By midnight, they had compiled the full archive. Marcus saved it under one word: exposure. But the closer they got to the truth, the more dangerous it became. The first threat came as a quiet warning. A car idling too long outside Naomi's apartment. A phone call with no voice, only breathing. An anonymous text to Marcus: "Stop digging. She's not worth your career." He ignored it. So did she. Because both had already crossed the line where fear lost its power. 2 days later, the attack came. Naomi returned home late from a press briefing. Her front door was ajar. Inside, the apartment was dark, ransacked, the wall of evidence torn down. Red threads dangled like open wounds. Her laptop was gone. She froze, listening. A creak from the kitchen. A shadow moved. A figure turned toward her. Black gloves, a department-issued jacket. Marcus arrived minutes later, summoned by instinct rather than a call. He saw the figure fleeing into the rain. He gave chase through the alleyways, his lungs burning. The ghost of his old badge flashing through his mind. He caught a glimpse of the intruder's face under a flickering streetlight. Officer Trent Mallory. The same man who had fired the bullet that started it all. The same man now sent to finish what he couldn't justify. Mallory vanished into the night, but Marcus retrieved what mattered: a shattered flash drive on the ground. Half the data corrupted, half still intact. He returned to Naomi's apartment. She sat amidst the wreckage, calm in a way only the broken understand. He placed the damaged drive on the table. She nodded once. No words. The next morning, a new email went out from an encrypted server, signed only with 2 initials. N.E. It contained every surviving file. Every policy, every internal memo, every timestamp that exposed the rot. It was sent to every major news outlet in the country. Within hours, the system they fought began to implode. The news broke like a flood. Internal corruption at the Atlanta Police Department. Body cam manipulation, illegal directives, obstruction of justice, names, titles, evidence, all public. Protests turned to marches. Marches to movements. Naomi's name became a chant, and Marcus's silence became sacrifice. But inside the storm, they both knew something the headlines didn't. This was never about fame or vindication. It was about reclaiming truth from the jaws of power. That night, as helicopters circled overhead and the city's skyline flickered with flashing lights, Naomi stood at her window once again. Below, thousands gathered with candles, their lights shimmering like stars reflected on wet pavement. She could see her reflection in the glass, the same eyes that once stared down fear, now burning with quiet purpose, across town. Marcus watched the same broadcast, Naomi's name on the ticker, her voice narrating the truth he'd helped deliver. His phone vibrated with another anonymous text. This time only 3 words: "We know now." He smiled faintly, exhaling relief. For the first time, neither of them was invisible. The truth had a name, a face, and a pulse, and it was still beating. The courthouse loomed like a monument to promises long forgotten. Cold stone, high windows, and a flag that waved solemnly in the spring breeze. Inside, the air was heavy with expectation. Cameras lined the marble hall, journalists murmured, and the hum of whispered anticipation filled every corner. For months, the city had watched as the truth unspooled, one revelation after another, each thread leading back to the same core rot. A system built to protect itself, not the people it served. And now, for the first time, the walls of that system would face judgment. Dr. Naomi Ellis stood at the center of it all. No longer in a sling, no longer a victim, but a force. Her suit was simple, dark. Her expression steady. Beside her, her attorney reviewed notes, but Naomi wasn't focused on legal strategy. She was thinking of every patient she'd ever saved, every heartbeat she'd ever restored, and how her own life had been nearly erased without consequence. Today wasn't about her survival. It was about every person who never got the chance to tell their story, Across the aisle, Detective Marcus Hale sat in the witness area. He wasn't in uniform, hadn't been for months. His career was gone, his pension uncertain, his reputation fractured. But in its place stood something far more enduring: integrity. He'd risked everything, and in return he'd found peace. When Naomi took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. The judge's gavel struck once, echoing like thunder through the vaulted chamber. Cameras flashed. Her testimony began. She spoke of the night on the roadside, and her words clinical, exact. She described the smell of rain on asphalt, the sound of the shot, the coldness of the pavement beneath her palms. She didn't cry. Her voice carried the weight of truth stripped of emotion, the kind that pierces harder because it doesn't beg to be believed. Then came the footage, played before the jury and the world. The words that sealed the department's fate echoed from the screen. Cameras rolling? Not yet. The courtroom rippled with gasps. Marcus testified next. He recounted how evidence was buried, reports falsified, directives rewritten. He confessed to once being part of that culture, complicit through silence, obedient to survival. And then with quiet conviction he explained why he chose to break. When he finished, there was no applause, no dramatic outburst. Just silence, the kind that follows when truth finally outweighs fear. Over the next several weeks, indictments came swiftly. Officer Trent Mallory was charged with reckless endangerment and falsification of reports. Several superiors resigned under scrutiny. The police commissioner stepped down. A city commission voted unanimously to implement sweeping reforms: body cam regulations, civilian oversight boards, and transparency mandates. But for Naomi and Marcus, justice wasn't about the verdicts. It was about the shift. The protests outside evolved into something else: community programs, educational workshops, voter initiatives. People who had once felt invisible began to speak, and this time the city listened. Months later, Naomi stood again at the steps of City Hall. This time, invited, not accused. A crowd gathered before her, candles glowing softly against the dusk. She didn't give a speech. Instead, she stood quietly, the wind playing through her hair, her eyes reflecting the flicker of light from thousands of small flames. Marcus stood at the edge of the crowd, unannounced, unnoticed. He watched her for a long moment, pride in his eyes, humility in his stance. He knew she didn't need saving. She never had. All she'd needed was someone inside the walls to open a door. Later, as the crowd dispersed and the candles burned low, Naomi walked to where he stood. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Two lives, once strangers, now forever bound by the truth they unearthed together. The city skyline glowed behind them, streaked with red and gold as dawn began to break. Somewhere a siren wailed, distant, routine, unthreatening. Naomi looked toward it, then back at Marcus. The silence between them felt lighter this time, no longer burdened by fear but filled with understanding. She extended her hand. He took it, and together they walked down the courthouse steps into a city still flawed, still imperfect, but undeniably changed. The camera panned upward, catching the morning sun cresting the skyline, casting long shadows that stretched like echoes of everything they had endured. A voiceover, calm and resolute, would narrate the final line in Naomi's tone. Justice isn't a destination. It's a pulse, faint at first but stronger every time someone refuses to let it die. The screen faded to black. The heartbeat of the city continued,